Hey there, how's it going? My name's Matt, and I was just watching the news this morning and something prompted me to record a video, and I don't even know why, but here we go. I was watching the news this morning and it came up about an article about how 30 years ago was the terrible events at Port Arthur, where Martin Bryan went and did what he did in Tasmania. Now, what brings that to mind though was about 30 years ago, it's very, very close, I actually joined the Navy in 1996 for 3 months. And the Navy at the time, from my experience, was quite a challenging one. And I remember though, before going into the Navy, that I was sat in my lounge room in Seaburn Drive in Orange, and I gave my life to Christ. Now, I remember sitting down with a guy called Lee Cook and David Sanderson, and what really struck out to me back then was that there was a particular verse, and it goes like this. It says in 2 Corinthians 5:17 from the New King James Version, it says, "Therefore, if anyone is in Christ, he is a new creation. Old things have passed away. Behold, all things have become new." Now, that was such a life-changing event those 30 years ago. But the next life-changing event, though, was going into the Navy. Now, the Navy back in 1996 was crazy. It really was. I remember doing all the fitness tests and the physical tests, the mental tests, the psychological tests getting into the Navy, because they want to make sure that you're right and fit to join the Navy. And it's quite amazing how everything happened. But yeah, I remember going into Sydney, where I had all the testing and everything else as well. And then once I was accepted into the Navy, I was flown down to Melbourne. It was my first time into Melbourne without my mum and dad. Going into the Navy was my first time away from my parents for an extended period of time. And it was actually quite interesting experience from memory. But I remember the Navy and how strict it was. I remember having to cut my hair shorter than what it is right now, and I had to be clean shaven. I remember getting my left and my right confused. So confused I had to write on my left hand my left, and my right hand my right. Because when you're going left, 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 right, left, left, right, left, right, left, right, left. When you're leading your team or your patrol, I had to make sure that everything was perfect. And I remember even getting the right and my left around the wrong way. No comment. But yeah, I just also remember having to do kit parades, at 5 o'clock in the morning, and getting in trouble because it's just what I did. But I also remember going into my first 4 weeks. I was only in the Navy for 3 months. But the first 4 weeks, it's mandatory service. You had to stay on the ground, on the site, HMAS Cerberus, for 4 weeks. And in the first few weeks, you had to go to your first church service. It was mandatory. And I slept in through the church service I wanted to go to, ended up going to my first ever Catholic service. And I just remember taking communion and everything else as well. And yeah, it was different. But the one thing that struck out to me was that before I went into the Navy, like I said, I was sitting in Seaburn Drive, and David and Lee prayed that I would have fellowship. Because without that fellowship, it's really, really difficult to stay on track. And that's what happened to me. After those 4 weeks of, we had to stay on site. My first weekend, I went out and hit the town, literally. I got blind drunk quite a number of times. But it was an escape. It was a release. Yet, there was no fellowship. There was no relationship with God that I really had by myself to help me keep going along. I suppose the purpose of this video is to say, hey, without fellowship, it's really important to make sure you're connected with someone. It doesn't matter who they are, but as long as they're connected to you in Christ. really interesting how we get so caught up in life, we get so caught up with challenges and trials, but without that fellowship, without that someone, that special someone, regardless of who they are, to help you along that straight and narrow, life can be really, really tough. After 3 months of serving in the Navy, at the end of it, I was in hospital twice for the flu. I was smoking cigarettes. I'd been out every weekend that I could to get out of the Navy. And when it came to the end, I was physically unfit. I pushed myself. I was, 60 kilos. So that's, quite small for me. But I was so thin and I was unwell. And I was given the option to either leave the Navy with a honorary discharge or to be let go. And so I took the honorary discharge. I can go back now if I want to, and I'll probably go back as a chaplain if I went back at all. But it's amazing how over 30 years ago, when I first gave my life to God, to where I am now in 2026, it's phenomenal how much, there's been countless testimonies about how good God has been. But this is just an example of how important it is to have fellowship and to have someone to help you along your journey. Thank you very much. Have a great day. I'm Matt. Bye.